The levels are set. The mics are ready.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
So strap yourself in. It's time to go one-on-one with Bill Alexander.
Let's go.
Hi, everyone. William Eric Alexander. All my friends call me Bill, and you're on One with Bill Alexander. Hope everything's going fine for you on this beautiful day, no matter when you're watching, listening, or just hanging out with the program today. So on the program, I have an author by the name of Carly Heath. Carly, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show, Bill.
So could you explain to my audience who you are as you hold up your book, The Reckless Kind?
So my book, The Reckless Kind, comes out November 9th, and it's a young adult novel coming out from Soho Teen, and it's about 3 misfit teens in 1904 Scandinavia, and they defy the expectations of their rural Scandinavian village in every possible way. They leave their families, they go off to live on their own, and in order to maintain their way of life, they need to defeat the villain of the book in the annual horse race. And so it's got horse training in it for the horse kids out there. And it's also got some social commentary about the importance of following your heart and connecting with the people who are supportive of you, and being true to yourself, which I think is a really important message for kids today.
So of all places in the world to write about, why Scandinavia at that time?
Ever since I was a kid, really, I've loved Norway. I've been obsessed with Norway, specifically the little Norwegian fjord ponies. They're so cute. They're these round ponies that are sort of butterscotch colored. So that's kind of like my initial love for all things Scandinavian. And then after college, I read Christian Lavensdatter, which is a book that came out in the 1920s by Sigrid Undset, and she won the Nobel Prize in Literature for Christian Lavensdatter. And I love that book. I love the setting. I love the characters, and I hated the message of it, though.
Okay.
The message of Christian Lavensdatter is basically, if you defy your parents, you will suffer, and it will be bad for you. And so I think it's really important to, sometimes society restricts you, right? Sometimes parents don't have the best idea of how you should live your life. And I think a really important message for kids is to listen to what feels right to you and be true to yourself. And so this book kind of, in a way, has everything that I love about Christian Lavensdatter, the beautiful Scandinavian setting, the kind of rich, really emotional characters, but a message that's a little bit more feminist, a little bit more defiant, and a little bit reckless, as it were.
So how long did it take you to write the book?
So I wrote the first draft actually in 2014, 2015. And the biggest part of writing a book is the revision process. And so the revision process brought me through many, many different drafts of the book. And the original draft that I wrote back in 2014 is unrecognizable from what the finished book is. And the really great thing about the publishing industry is that so many people read your book as it's going through the publishing pipeline. So you get so many different perspectives on it. And so you can really refine your craft and make your book as good as it can possibly be. So just in the whole process to getting an agent, I would send it out to agents, which is like the process of writing a little query letter, sending out sample chapters, sometimes sending out the whole book if they like your sample chapters and want to read more. And I was really lucky to get some agents giving me feedback on my work because they liked it. They said it was really close, but they had some suggestions for how to make it better. So those agents, I'm so grateful to them because they told me things that needed to be better about the book. And so during that whole process, I revised. Eventually connecting with my publisher. And so that's what the agent does. They send out once they sign you, they send your book out to publishers. And then the publisher who loves your book offers on it, buys it. And then it goes through a whole editorial process with the publisher, which is great because not only is the editor there giving you feedback, exploring ways that you can make your book as good as it can be and as emotional as it can be. You also have other people at the publishing house who are reading it and offering their feedback. And so then by the time it hits the shelves and the whole process, I did not know this, but the whole process from when the publisher buys the book to when it lands on shelves is like 2 years. And so just even on my own, before I got my editor feedback, I'm like, I'm just going to read through this again, make my own edits. And so it's a lot of time to really think about your book and make changes to it before it hits shelves.
Now, I spoke to quite a few authors in the past, and they went the route of self-publishing. Why didn't you go in that direction?
I feel like in order to be really successful as a self-published author, you have to be really good at marketing, and you have to kind of be like an entrepreneur. Like you have to be in charge of like the publishing, you have to be in charge of the marketing and the publicity. And I really wanted to focus on just making my book the best it can be, and trust the publicity process to a publisher who has all that, who has distribution with stores and libraries and can take care of all that business side of things. So that's personally the path I chose. I think self-publishing, if people who are good at that and who can do that, I have so much respect for them, because it's like having many skills and balancing all those skills, and that's a lot of work.
Yeah, some of them do it because they say trying to get a publisher or an agent is very difficult. So instead of going through that process, they have gone their own route. I actually interviewed someone about a year ago who is a doctorate. She has her doctorate in English, and she wrote a book. And instead of going their own publisher, she went self-publishing. And I found out 6 weeks ago that she now has her own publishing company because of how difficult it was for writers like yourself to get through the publishing process. So she said, "The heck with everybody else, I'll do it myself." So
yeah, that's amazing that she's doing that. And that's a whole skill set of like being an entrepreneur and starting a whole business. That is amazing. And that takes so much, that takes a whole nother skill. I really like the traditional publishing pipeline, because I think it makes you aware of how much you have to stand out in order to get an agent's attention, because agents get thousands and thousands of submissions a year. Right. And they really sometimes only sign one person per year, maybe two. And so I was thinking, like, how can I stand out amongst all of these? And I do admit, though, I was worried that I would ever be able to find an agent and a publisher, because my book is kind of weird. It's like Scandinavia. Some people are going to be like, that's kind of a weird setting, and that's kind of a weird time period.
Right.
And I did get that feedback from publishers early on. They're like, historical fiction is a hard sell as it is, but because this book isn't World War II or a time period that's like known and taught in schools, it might be hard to find a connection with readers and find a market for it. So I'm really grateful that I did connect with the publisher that I did, who saw the value in it and who saw that this is a great story. Yes, it's a little weird time period and it's a little weird historical book, but the characters are hopefully something that's going to resonate with readers. I think the characters are great. And the story and all of that might connect with readers.
When you sent me the bio info and all the information about this, I'm reading through it and I'm going, what does YA stand for? And I'm
Oh,
going over and over again, going, what? I know what it is, but I couldn't think of it, which stands for,
young adult.
yeah. And I'm going, that makes sense now. So, but the thing is what's really unique about this book is you're dealing with the 1904 time period, but you're also dealing with,
Yeah, I have.
the
Yeah, I
queer
have.
historical value
Yeah.
back then. Was that really known back then, or are you putting a 2021 spin on a story about 1904?
Well, queer people have always been around, and
Well, no, I know that, but how
I
did you
know.
know about that in 1904? I don't think they really wrote about it, did they?
Yeah, it was actually really fascinating. I'm really fascinated by researching history that kind of has been hidden or not quite
Okay.
brought to light as much as it could be. And so I found a lot of great historical references to kind of pull from and use. And I found some really great voices from that time period. One particular person who was prominent in my research is a man named Edward Carpenter, who was born in 1844. And he was an early gay rights activist, an early vegetarian and animal rights activist, and an early socialist. And he
Okay.
wrote these pamphlets that were all about, a better world, how to make society better, how to improve society. And because he was gay and he lived with his partner for most of his life, I believe for over 40 years, he also wrote about different sexualities and sexual identities. And one of his pamphlets is called Homogenic Love, Its Place in a Free Society, which that's an old-timey term for basically homosexuality. And in his pamphlet, which was published, I want to say in like 1902, around there, I don't know the exact date, but he wrote, not only do homosexual people exist and same-sex relationships exist, but there's a purpose for them in society, and they make society better. And he points to all the different ways that, people who might not be reproducing and making babies and, are important members of society, and his pamphlet's wonderful. I could go on and on about it. He also wrote another pamphlet called some transitional types of people, which is basically about like the transgender community in late 19th century, early 20th century, which is really fascinating. And I learned so many amazing things about queer people in the 19th century. Oh, there was terminology back then that was a little bit obviously different than the terminology we use now. There were some people called female husbands, which were basically people who were assigned female at birth, but who dress in men's clothes and who identified as men in every way possible,
Right.
and even married women. And it wasn't until after their death that it was discovered that they had been female according to that society's description of what female is. So yeah, these stories are so fascinating. And so I just wanted to kind of tell a story that showcases things as they really are, which is a diverse population of people and characters. I also have a lot of disability representation in my book, which is something that's important to me because personally, everyone I know is disabled in some way, whether
Right.
it's an invisible disability like mental illness, or whether it's a physical disability. And it's something that we don't really see enough in media and in books. And so I hope in the future, the stories I tell will kind of represent the diversity of the world, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I know. Because if I take these glasses off, I can't see anything. So that's mine. I'm as blind as a bat. But what's interesting about it is that you're doing and I had a guest on a few weeks ago by the name of Chris Tompkins. We were dealing with youth in the queer and gay and lesbian society, and how you work with those kids and introduce them, because there's not enough representation in media for them to grab onto. And my issue is that I think it's great that everybody's doing this, but I hate the terminology that we use,
Mm,
because I think the terminology is actually, it's not advancing it. I think it's stepping it back, because everybody is so worried about what to say. And my response is, just call them by their name. It's not that difficult,
mhm.
or where they're located at, or what school, whatever. And I think we categorize a little bit too much. But when you sent this to a publisher, do you think they were a little bit worried about the characters in the book and what you were touching on in the book, that they said, nah, maybe not, until
Hmm.
the one that you're dealing with right now said, this is perfect, this is what we're looking for?
It's really interesting. We're in a young adult literature is probably the most progressive area of media that's happening right now. It seems like every month there's so many books that have diverse characters that represent different sexual identities and gender identities. And so that's really, really awesome. So I didn't necessarily, I would say the historical time period and the setting was the area that I got the most pushback on, rather than the diversity of the kids. But I will say, there was one publisher, I think there are some publishers that are a little bit, they just aren't educated in some things that are happening right now. And
Right.
so there was one publisher who does claim to be a diverse publisher, but who had some really problematic opinions about, how do you say, about especially, queer women. I think there's a very positive representation in many ways towards queer men, and that identity is really positive. But when it comes to queer women, there is a fear that I think it's misogyny in a way. So there's that sort of pushback against the female perspective a little bit. And that was really the only time, though, that I got any problematic feedback from a publisher. Everyone else was really open and supportive towards the representation in the book.
Now, where are you located at? I forgot to ask you in the beginning.
Oh yeah, I'm in Burbank, California.
Okay. Well, I'm located south of the city of Pittsburgh. I'm in what you consider rural America. And we are about 5 to 10 years behind, we say, the West Coast. And we're just starting to notice some of this stuff where people are finally acknowledging who they are, and being able to say who they are, and a lot of things like that. And I was in a situation yesterday with a bunch of women that were my age, and my 14-year-old daughter, who is very 2021, let's just say that. And they were talking about this, and my daughter was trying to explain to them the pronouns that they have to use, and these older women couldn't understand why. And it was interesting watching a 14-year-old talking to 50-year-olds about how society is changing, because the 50-year-olds, it's not that they don't want to see it, they don't understand it.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting, though, that you say that about the 50-year-olds. And my parents are in their 60s, but they grew up, during the 60s and 70s, where everything was like revolution, right?
Right.
And everything was like change. Don't trust anyone over 30.
Uh-huh.
Like that was the whole boomer mindset. And it's really interesting, though, how like my parents' generation is so conservative now, so resistant to change, so resistant to hey, maybe, basically the Gen Z generation is like, how can we make things more inclusive, more fair for everyone? And how can we allow people to be more authentic and live authentically? And then, you say, hey, maybe people can't be easily categorized into male or female. Maybe people should be free to either marry whoever they want or not get married, or, be in a relationship or not be in a relationship, or be in a relationship with multiple people. Gen Z is like, all of that is fine. But the boomers, who used to be like freedom for everyone, is like, no, change.
And it's the whole thing about the feminists too back then are becoming very conservative in the older age, because they're afraid of change, and they don't want to see things that they know it go into some direction that they don't recognize. And that's what I think is very interesting. And your book, in some ways, even though it was going on in 1904, no one really knew about it. And I mean, not only in Scandinavia, but I'm sure here in the United States, it was here too, but it was just hidden so well that no one knew about it.
Yeah, well, I'm lucky enough to, I grew up in San Francisco, and San Francisco has always had a very thriving queer and diverse community, like all the way back in the early 1900s.
Right.
So there were sections of town that were kind of devoted to people who, you can see, whether it's artists or whether it's people who don't quite fit into the conventional way of doing things, could easily find a place in San Francisco where they were totally accepted. But what's really interesting is that things were getting published. These identities were being explored, but they weren't necessarily being published by like mass media necessarily. Right. They were published in the form of pamphlets that you would hand out amongst your community of people, and it would kind of be like an underground thing. But back in the day, there were even, in the 1900s and late 1800s, in English language, there were gay romance novels, and even one, I was able to find the earliest gay romance novel with a happy ending where the couple gets together at the end. And it was written, I really should have the date written down, but I think it was like around 1899, 1901. So these stories did exist, and they were out there. You just have to do a little digging to find them.
So what made you write about this? Okay, for the time period, you told me because you were interested in it, and there was another author that you looked up to, but why did you decide to go and make your characters queer in the book? And not right.
Yeah, well, it's an identity that I identify with. Okay. I would identify as queer, and I would say that I'm as far as gender identity, I would identify as non-binary. And I would say, haven't quite figured out the sexual orientation thing, probably on the asexual spectrum. But my main character, Asta, she was the language that you would use today to describe her would be asexual and aromantic. And she's not interested in a romantic relationship, but she's very interested in a very meaningful platonic relationship with her friends. And she kind of has this fantasy of like, what if we live together? What if I could be in a relationship with someone, but it's not like a marriage, but it's a meaningful relationship where we're together forever, and we are able to express our feelings for each other, but it's not necessarily in a romantic way. And so that's kind of the thoughts that she's grappling with in the story. And and disability is also something that's represented, and the disability that's represented is something I deal with. I'm hard of hearing, and I wear hearing aids. And a girl back in 1904 wouldn't have hearing aids. So her hard of hearingness is considered kind of a fault. And this is the time when eugenics is coming around. Mm-hmm. And so the idea that she is flawed and she has and she should be grateful that anyone at all wants to marry her, because she's I guess you could say kind of like flawed in some way, right? I also have representation of spinal injuries, which I have, and post-concussion syndrome. And so I really like thinking of what would it be like for a person back in that time period where the mentality and the ideology is a little bit more that if something happened to you and you're disabled in some way, it's because of a character flaw, or it's because you're not religious enough, or, God is punishing you for something. And so playing with that was really interesting. And especially having the characters kind of deprogram themselves from this mindset that's very judgmental of them, and find comfort in their love and their support of each other.
So were there any situations you wrote about in the book that you could identify with? Was there any of you put into this character?
Yeah, a lot of authors say, no, the book has nothing to do with me. But I would say people who read the book will be like, oh, you're writing about yourself. And yeah, the book is very, parts of me are in all the characters, and it's very much a personal story that's coming from my experience.
So the one thing, and maybe in that culture in 1904 they didn't get it, but when in 2021, when you think about two people living together, the first thing everybody jumps to is sex,
Mhm.
which probably isn't even their 1/8 of the time, but they're just roommates and they're just friends, they're companions and stuff like that. Were they dealing with that same situation in 1904?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different sort of situation. Obviously, if it's a girl living with two men, that is something that comes up where people are like, they think of her as quite deviant for this decision of hers. And she's like, no, that's not what's happening. And so that's kind of a source of, she's discovering herself, but what they think of her is much different than the situation that it actually is. And so the idea of things being a lot more complicated and a lot more nuanced than the way the town is viewing things is something that is explored in the book.
As I mentioned a few minutes ago, and as I listened to you talk, I have a difficulty with labels. I always have. And I'm a 55-year-old white straight male that lives in a middle-class community, and so on and so forth. But still, I have a problem identifying with I mean, using terms to identify. Let me rephrase that. Why does the word, because what I think of the word queer meaning, I don't think it means the same thing to you, because I hear it more as a
slur.
Negative. Yes. Thank you. So what does it mean to you?
Yeah, I actually have a problem with labels too, because I feel like anything that is describing anyone who is like non-cis hetero is there's so much cumbersome language around it. I've started using queer just because when I was in San Francisco at San Francisco State, we have a queer studies program, and so that is the word, and it's a very inclusive word too. It encompasses everyone, and it didn't have the slur type vibe to it that I've noticed that many people who are of like either a Gen X or boomer generation associate it more with like a slur. So there's all these cumbersome issues, and then some people say LGBTQ plus or plus IA, and that's also a wordful. That's like a mouthful. And so something that I've grappled with is like, I don't like labels. Why is anything labels? Exactly. You don't have to like label straight people. Like you don't have to like, no. So I totally get that. Like, why do we need labels at all? But yeah, it would be nice if there was just something that didn't make the boomers and the Gen Xers kind of cringe a little bit, and then there was something that wasn't a mouthful like LGBTQIA. So I just people's good.
Well, the reason I asked that is because, again, I would have never brought it up if, and I would have just talked to you as Carly. I would never, but it's written in the book. That's what the book is about. That's the subject you're tackling. And if it would have never been there, I would have never known because of the way it is. But when you were talking about what the word queer, this is what it means to me, which is why I have a problem with it. When I was a kid growing up in the 70s, the word meant odd. And I don't see you as being odd. And that's where my issue is, because the other words would be odd, strange, unusual, funny, peculiar and bizarre. I don't see that way. I mean, I just don't understand why we need to use it. And the
Yeah.
whole idea of trying to explain it. And you're right, LGBTQ is a mouthful. And when I say it, I have to think so hard to say it that I don't get the letters mixed up, because I
Mhm.
will mess it up and I'll probably offend somebody if I do that. But that's not my intention. So
Yeah, yeah, it'd be nice if there was. Well, the good thing though is language is fluid, and maybe
Yes.
eventually something will come up. Language is always changing. Someone will come up with it with another word, and it'll be great. And maybe we'll get to a place where we don't necessarily have to put people into you're this or this. You just everyone's everyone, and it just we become normalized for being human.
So you mentioned about being in a study group. If you don't mind me asking, how old
Okay.
are you?
Oh, I am. Oh gosh, let's just say this: I am a millennial.
Okay.
And so that gives a vibe. I'm
Wait, I gave my age, you give yours.
I am 40.
Oh, okay. I would have never guessed that. I mean, really, I would have never imagined that. I would have figured 10 years younger. That's impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I was born in 1981.
Yeah, I was in high school in 1981. But anyhow, so when you and this now I'm going back on the personal
Mhm.
side. When you were growing up, when did you know that you were not the same as everybody else?
Oh gosh. Well, I thought. Well, here's the thing, though. I thought I was, because I was very like I felt like I was just the default. So I do remember in 5th grade, a lot of people being like really talking about boys at that point, and I was
Okay.
really not interested in boys at all. And but I still thought I was like the default, because I'm like a norm, like I of course had like lesbian friends, I had gay friends, I had there was one trans friend who I had, and but like yeah, I didn't I guess I didn't really think of like applying a label to myself. I did in college learn Greek mythology. I was really into Greek mythology, and I learned about the Greek goddess Artemis, or Diana, and I was like, I identify with her because she is awesome. She like never marries. She's
Okay.
like she's like she's like guardian of the animals, and I'm like, that is my identity. I'm like, Artemis/Diana is my vibe. But yeah, I still, that's why I struggle with labels, and I struggle with anything, because I do think of myself as such the default. I'm like, I feel like I'm very generic. Like,
Okay,
but I don't have any desire to be in a relationship or get married.
Have you gotten the pressure from your mother about children?
Yes, which is bizarre, because like having children like ruined my mom's life. Like I only started kind of talking to her about this recently, but I'm like, wow, you were on a direction in your life, and then all of a sudden it was derailed by being stuck with kids for like the next 20 years of your life. But and I just remember growing up, she was not happy having kids at all. Right. There's some people who are like meant to be a mother and who are meant to be like a wife and stuff, and then there's some people who are like that's not, they got stuck doing it, but it's not something that made them happy. And I think my parents were they got stuck doing it, but it wasn't something that made them happy. And so yeah, that was a little bit weird. I remember her saying a few things like, oh, I guess I'm never going to have grandchildren, that sort of thing. Yeah. But now that I'm like an aware adult who's like can look back on things, I can be like, wait a minute. I think she now knows that like that would not be something that would make me happy at all. But I think she can kind of realize that, oh, probably that like desire for grandchildren comes from just doing things the way things have always been done, and not necessarily oh, I want to have my child be happy, that
Right.
sort of
Societal
thing.
pressure. Yeah, I got
That's the word I'm looking for.
it.
Yeah.
Because now that's interesting to me, because you're saying your mother wasn't happy. Do you feel if your mother and dad were not putting that situation, that your mother would accept your lifestyle more if she would have been single all those years? Not to say that she doesn't, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think she's happy being married. And I think having kids though, now that she's realizing things, she's like, okay, that was not something that made me happy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think now though she's in a place where she's happy. I think she acknowledges that like her kids, because both me and my sister have no desire to have children at all.
Okay.
And so her kids are probably much happier not having children, and it's something that that she's accepted.
Have you heard the one saying, but if you don't, who's going to take care of you?
Oh, I think that's oh my God. So okay, if you have kids, like you have a 50-50 chance of your children hating you,
Yeah.
or like just being like, okay, I'm gonna just take care of my parent. Like, and I just have a feeling like the chance of my child hating me would probably be higher in like the 95% thing. So I think it's a much smarter use of my time and money to invest in a good growth ETF. And then by the time that I'm retiring, I will have a good chunk of change to put into a nice retirement home. So rather than burden some poor child with taking care of me in my old age.
So you look at the 90s, you look at the 2000s, now we're in 2021. What changes are you seeing, and are they for the better? Now, let's not even talk about the last 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk 2016 now, where we're at right now.
Well, I remember maybe I have like rose colored glasses or whatever. But I remember, do you remember like the years leading up to Obama, like around the time Obama was elected?
Yes.
Like it felt like around that time, it's like we were entering this era of like, this is how things are supposed to be. Like I remember like everything was kind of felt like it was moving forward, and there was like progress, and we're like, oh, equality is a possibility. And I think we were just really, I think maybe I was not aware of how the rest of the country was happening, because I'm like a California person, and I'm like in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, and we're like, Obama's gonna be president, racism's over. We're all gonna like sing kumbaya and like hold hands, and it's gonna be awesome. And then all of a sudden, I think during the Obama administration, there was all of this like racism that came up, and it was shocking for me. I remember the first time like someone who I knew, who was like a Facebook friend, set a racist thing, and I was like, wait a minute, like I had never seen that sort of thing before. And I think with Facebook also kind of coming up around that time, suddenly you were connecting with people who were like in places that weren't San Francisco or Los Angeles, at least for me. And I was like, whoa, mind blown. I had no idea people thought like this. And maybe it was I can't tell if it was just me suddenly being aware of stuff like that, like hatred and that sort of thing, or if it was like this has always been there, and now it's like it's bubbling to the surface because because now they have a Black president to attack. Anyway, my mind was blown. I became aware of things that I had never been aware of before, and it's been eye-opening. And I think maybe the illusion of progress was just that, it was an illusion, because I think we have to reckon with the fact that there are a lot of forces in our country that envision society being a certain way, which is a very white, a very like heterosexual, a very, I guess you could say, like a very rigid sort of way. And my San Francisco, California upbringing is way different than the way things are elsewhere in the country.
Well, do you see the, again, I don't want to use this word, but I have to, that your lifestyle is becoming more acceptable?
I would say there is this sudden rise in pushback that seems to have happened in the last couple years.
Okay.
And again, maybe I wasn't aware of it before, but it seemed like just like what's happening in Texas, where the Texas, the education system in Texas is like banning a bunch of books, and there is, a lot of pushback on women's rights happening, and and suddenly, there's, it just seems like there's a lot of pushback that's coming up. And again, maybe it's because I wasn't aware of this before, and now I'm suddenly being aware of it. Or maybe it's because there has been progress, but whenever there is progress, there always has to be pushback against it.
Because I've noticed that some people that always talked about not approving of it now has someone in their family that has said, this is who I am. And now the family has to deal with it. And they're dealing with it in the way of accepting it who it is, because it's their child or it's a relative or whatever it is. And you always want that person to be happy. So I'm starting to notice that, because, and I'm not talking large groups, I'm talking individuals that may have not understood what was going on before and had someone in their family who was this way, but could never come out and tell them. So I don't know. Well, it's one of those things that's always going to be ongoing that we're going to have to figure out. But with now the publishing company you're working with, that's Soho Teen.
Yeah.
Soho Teen. What types of books they deal with? Is it all young adult or?
Yeah, Soho Teen is an imprint of Soho Press, and Soho Teen is all young adult. It's all books for teens, and their books are amazing. I was so lucky because I had been familiar with Soho Teen for a while, and like some of my favorite books have come out from Soho Teen. But their main publisher company is Soho Press, and they do a lot of like literary fiction and crime and thrillers as well. So the whole company does all genres. Okay.
And do you see the next book you're writing going to Soho Teen?
I would love that to happen. It depends on a lot of things, but that hopefully that's what happens, and I would love to keep working with them, definitely.
So the book you said is coming out November 9th, correct?
Yes.
Okay, because the original day I had was November 2nd, but.
Oh yeah, it got pushed back because of supply chain. I call him Supply Chain because I imagine this little gremlin like eating up all the paper and like destroying all the ink. But there's this problem right now with the economy and supplies not reaching where they need to be. So like publishers are running out of paper and ink and cardboard and all the things that are needed to make books. So dates are getting pushed back.
And with that being said, is there going to be a digital copy of the book?
Yes, it's going to be an ebook. It's going to be an audiobook as well. So on November 9th, any format that you could want, you'll probably find it.
Now, are you going to be reading the audiobook?
No. There are two actors that they hired who are really great. I don't know if I'm allowed to like say who the actors are yet because I haven't seen it.
I won't tell anybody.
Published. Yeah, I haven't seen it published anywhere like on audible.com or anything. So I'll just say they are going to be amazing because they are like my top picks for like the actors who I envisioned for these characters. So the narrators are going to be really fantastic. So if you're an book fan, it's going to be an awesome audiobook.
Okay, because I thought maybe you would read it, but
that's a big like task. It's like 7 hours to read an audiobook.
You don't do it all at once, though.
I know. Yeah. Well, let's just say this. I'm really glad someone else is doing it.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So has there been any previews done of the book and anybody saying what they think of it so far?
Yes, I've been really lucky. The whole trade review thing. So there's like these trade journals that review books, and like Publishers Weekly and Kirkus and Booklist and Book Page, and there's a whole bunch of other ones, but they've all been really enthusiastic and positive. So I've been really thrilled to see that. And then you can go on Goodreads and you can see some people who got advanced copies of the book have been leaving their reviews. So that's been really nice. And it's been very educational as well whenever you get like feedback from like the general public and you're like, oh, wow, this is how people are receiving it. You learn a lot as an artist, for sure.
So this is your first book, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And have you thought about what the second one's going to be about?
Yes. Well, I've written a second book. It's more magical. It takes place on a magical Scandinavian island, and it deals with a family that's cursed to turn into animals at some point in their life, but they never know when it's going to happen. And so it deals with sorcery and all sorts of magical things that I love. And I've also thought about doing a sequel for The Reckless Kind, but that all would depend on how well this book does. But in my head, there's like ideas marinating.
Okay.
And then I have a couple of contemporary young adult books that I've finished that are in the revision process.
So in other words, you're just mainly focusing on young adult books.
Yeah.
So what fascinates you about writing for young adults?
I love the anxiety and I just love that teen experience of learning who you are and self-discovery, and also just the amount of emotion that happens when you are a teenager, where everything feels like such a big deal. And as people get older, the voice becomes a little bit more jaded, a little bit more like, well, falling in love again, this has happened, whereas when you're a teenager and like you're falling in love for the first time, or you're living out on your own for the first time, it's just such a big deal. And I think it's really fascinating.
So I was also looking at your bio and everything else you do, because you seem very busy, from your art to teaching to everything else. So is writing what you want your first career to be, or is there something else that you want to do and writing is just your backup plan?
Oh, no. Well, writing fully takes on like every spare moment of my time, because really you can't, like, if you're going to focus on writing, you have to like 100% go all in. So I'm definitely passionate about writing and books and all of that. I do love drawing and I love making art, but that has had to take a little had to get pushed to the side a little bit, just because writing takes up so much mental space and energy. So yeah, it's my main focus.
So Carly, I appreciate it. This was fun. I really enjoyed it. Is there anything that I didn't cover that you want to let everybody know about?
Yes, so the book will be coming out November 9th, and there's going to be a launch event hosted by Chevalier's Books in Los Angeles. And I think it's going to be either November 9th or November 10th. I'm not sure, but I'll be in conversation with another author named Rosie Thor. So that will be really great. And I will be posting info on that on my Twitter at Carly L. Heath, and my Instagram as well, which is at Carly Lynn Heath, Lyn Heath. And you can find out more about what I'm doing and see all my social medias at my website, www.carlyheathauthor.com.
Can you do me a big favor?
Yes.
Hold the book up again.
Oh, yeah.
There you go. So it's The Reckless Kind coming out on November 9th.
Yeah, definitely.
So, Carly, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. I wish you the best of luck, and I'd love to have you back on again.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill. It's been really fun.
I've really enjoyed myself. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you next time.
Definitely. Talk to you next time. Thank you.
Well, a big thank you goes out to Carly Heath for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Had a great conversation. Learned a few things, and hope you did too, because that's what the program's all about, one-on-one with Bill Alexander. Again, if you want to find out more information about Carly and her books, you can check her out at her website, which is carlyheathauthor.com. Again, that's carlyheathauthor.com. I'll post that in the description also. And one more thing, the name of the book is called The Reckless Kind, coming out November 9th, 2021. Again, she said it was supposed to come out the 2nd, but due to supply chain issues, paper and everything else, they had to push it off. But digital copies will also be available on that date. And also the audio book, which she didn't want to tell me who it was, because honestly, I wasn't going to tell anybody really. So everybody, you have a great one. We'll talk to you next time here, one-on-one with Bill Alexander.